Hello and welcome to another episode of Crushing Comics. I'm your host Peter and we are here to fall in love with my comic book collection all over again. So I have our next book to unwrap here. And gosh, how does one get into this? So the thing I was thinking about today was what used to scare you, like when you were a kid. I've talked about how I was into really kind of macabre stuff, like Dracula, at the point that I started being a reader, which was when I was 6. But I remember, like, do you remember the first image that, like, really scared you? For me, it was Poltergeist. I think my mom was watching Poltergeist. She kind of liked those scary, ghosty kind of movies at the time. She was like a Stephen King fan. Now she doesn't like those things anymore. And I remember the scene, I was like walking through the room and I guess it was my bedtime, I probably was like 5. And I remember seeing the scene where all the chairs like rearranged themselves and just being like, ah! And that scared me so much. And then the other thing is Gremlins, even though I liked Gremlins, and that was like a movie I enjoyed watching, I just thought the mean Gremlins, like Stripe and all those, were so terrifying, and I would have nightmares about those. And the reason I thought of that was because my daughter, she doesn't really watch a lot of screen stuff, and I always pre-screen the screen stuff before she watches it. And so I always am like, well, this is not that scary, or else I wouldn't necessarily not show it to her, but I would at least explain to her when we were watching something scary. But then some things surprised me. So I remember one time in our old house in Philly, I was like, it was a movie I'd watched. It was The Wiz with Diana Ross and Michael Jackson. And she already loved Michael Jackson. She loved the music. And so she was watching the whole thing for the first time, and we broke it up into 2 parts. And I was like nodding off in our armchair, and she's watching it. And all of a sudden I hear, and I kind of open my eyes and I see she's on the couch like crying, and it's because the witch in The Wiz is actually quite scary, and she like tears apart the Scarecrow, who's Michael Jackson. Like, do you want to see Michael Jackson killed on screen? What is wrong with me? I'm a bad parent. So I was like, oh no, I paused, and she said, the Scarecrow! And she was only 3 and some change at this point, but it was a movie I'd pre-screened, and it didn't seem like it had a part that was going to be that terrifying. Clearly, I forgot about Michael Jackson being disemboweled. So, and so now I think I've permanently scarred her. She refuses to watch The Wiz anymore, even though she likes the music from it. And it just made me think, like, well, I still watch Gremlins. I have multiple copies of Gremlins on DVD, but I still have not rewatched Poltergeist. So that's what I was thinking. Let's see what's in this. This must be one of my early ones. It's only on 1 sheet of paper, and you've seen me open ones recently that have been on like 25 sheets of paper. Okay. So this is the one missing Master of Kung Fu volume number 2 that we have yet to open, and I'm actually going to open it live for the first time here. I'm going to crack the cellophane. As I've discussed in the past, these are all of the ones that I have are the variant covers. I don't always go for variant covers, and let's talk about for a second what that even means, right? I mean, clearly you know what a variant cover is, but it works a little bit differently for omnibuses than it does for a normal comic book. So for a normal comic book, the variant cover is usually a shorter printed cover, and a lot of times it's one that's not widely available. So maybe your store has to do some kind of incentive order to get it, like they have to order 10 of the normal issue for every one of the variant cover. Maybe it's unique to certain stores. Certain stores are big enough and they do big enough orders that they can commission a variant cover of their own. Sometimes the variant cover is just like an alternate version, right? So maybe it like is a X-rated version of a normal cover or something like that. Or it's a second printing, etc., etc. So on omnibuses from Marvel, it works a little bit differently. There's the main cover, which many more are printed of the main cover. And then the variant cover is available only in the direct market, so only to comic book stores. And the quantity is relatively limited, and the only difference is the dust cover. They don't have a different cover underneath, and I don't think anymore they have different ISBNs either. Maybe they do, because the ISBN is on the cover of the book, but then for them to have a different ISBN on the interior page, they would need to run different runs of press sheets to get on the interior page. So it used to be that the ISBNs are different. I don't know that that's the case anymore. And Marvel doesn't have a single thing that they always do for the classic covers. It just so happens that recently, for their omnibuses of more classic materials, they've been putting the actual original cover as the DM variant direct market variant, and that the cover that's been drawn by a modern artist is the main cover. So like Uncanny X-Men Volume 3, the main cover is by Jerome Pena, and that was the mass market cover, and then the DM cover was a classic variant of that. So I'm usually down for getting the new cover because, like, why not get some new art from some artist rather than a cover that's going to be in the book already. But these covers, I'd seen them so little in the past, and they're all like so dynamic, and I didn't really love the artists that they were choosing for the main covers. I remember the first one, I just really wasn't into the main cover, so I got the classic cover, and then it was kind of like I'd broken the seal, like, oh, I guess we're going to get variant covers all along. So clearly, this was all wrapped up and had never been reprinted before, so I've never read it before. Doug Moench writes all of it. It is Collecting Master of Kung Fu 38 through 70 and annual #1. So what's happening here? It says in the dust cover that the volume is kicking off at arguably the peak of Moench's collaboration with Paul Gulachi. And the two-part story set in the shadowy back streets and bars of Hong Kong and rises to a crescendo with the title's 50th issue. So I don't really know this very well. What I did find out as I've been reading a little bit of it recently is, you know, we've been opening these omnibuses and trying to learn about it, is Shang-Chi, he's not just this kung fu guy. It's not just this kind of like Bruce Lee pastiche over and over again. He joins the British Secret Service, or not the Secret Service, but their spy service. He's kind of like this international man of mystery. It's almost a lot more like a S.H.I.E.L.D. title that happens to have kung fu in it. And at this point, in the late 70s and 80s, was there a Nick Fury title? I think Nick Fury's title had ended at this point. So this was kind of like Marvel's S.H.I.E.L.D. of that period until S.H.I.E.L.D. came back in the 80s, which was after this had ended. So that's something that I think a lot of people overlook about it. And I don't know if I have a whole heck of a lot else to say about it here. Other than, you know, at a point in this, like at the beginning of this title, it was very much about Shang-Chi trying to unseat his father, who is Fu Manchu. And I think at the end of the prior volume, we see Fu Manchu effectively gets defeated, like he's gone. And so here we get Shang-Chi, who's kind of like a man without purpose to a degree, and it's kind of like, well, what is he going to do with himself at this point, you know? And his mentor in the Secret Service is kind of makes this assumption, like, you're always going to stick with me, you're always going to be a part of this because I'm your mentor and that's the way it's going to be. And Shang-Chi has this realization of like, no, because that's the relationship I had with my father, and that didn't turn out so well, so I'm not just going to unquestioningly follow you. And then, of course, Fu Manchu eventually comes back in this run. I just happened to open to this amazing page. I mean, look at this guy's face. That is some amazing artwork that you're not going to see in every Marvel comic book out there. So I'm so excited to have this full shelf, and quite possibly we will do a reading club at some point a little bit later this year, or who knows when, where I can't shelve it yet, it's not official, where we actually read through this book, and I would really love to do this. It seems like my copy's got some problems. So you might notice there's some glue at the top sometimes. That doesn't mean that it's glued. The thing that actually glued on is the headband here, which doesn't really, like, it has a purpose, but it's not crucial to the binding of your book. And sometimes you'll just see these little glue chips across the top of the pages. People sometimes see them and they're like, oh, I got a glued copy, it's not sewn. This is still a sewn omnibus. It still has page signatures that are sewn into the middle. It just so happens that some elements of the binding, even in a sewn book, are ultimately still glued. So that is the why of that. I'm trying to find the middle of a signature here to prove to you that it's still a sewn book. And then also the cover's a little bit crinkled. You know, there's a group of people, of omnibus buyers, who would say, here's a sewn middle of a signature. There's a group of omnibus buyers, I don't know if you can see that, but it's got the threads in the middle. And also this, as you will note, contains letter pages. A lot of Marvel's classic omnibuses include letter pages, and they wind up being the only reprints that include them. They won't do them in like epics or trade paperbacks, so that's like a good reason to buy the omnibus if you love that kind of stuff. But where was I going with that? Oh, so some omnibus collectors will only open the book if they're ready to read it because they like want to keep it in pristine condition on the shelf, and maybe they're going to reshelve it or resell it, and they don't want to crack the plastic on the book. But the argument against that is like sometimes there's printing errors. People get books where the pages didn't get cut and they're still bound together, or have like a massive ink mark in the middle of them, or there's a glue problem. So it's kind of like you probably should open your book while you can and send it back if you can to the person who sold it to you to get a new copy. Over the time of collecting all these things, my threshold for that kind of stuff has really changed. Like I won't send something back for an off-center dust jacket at this point. I'm like, I'll deal with that. It'll be fine. But as you note, I haven't opened a lot of these books, and it's long past the time that I could return them. So now I just get what I get. If I open one of them and they're going to have a printing error, that's just my book that has a printing error. But, you know, it's an imperfect science, and people get so up and they're, I can't believe Marvel sold me this book that's got this printing error. Look, dudes, like when these things go on press, we're talking about printing a run of 7, 8, 9,000. I've printed runs of things that have had print runs of 10 and 20 times that amount. You go on press for a press check, and you definitely don't want there to be errors in the book. Like Marvel is really good about not having errors in their printed omnibuses. DC is horrible. DC always has like missing pages, flipped pages. They have a terrible QC. I don't know who goes on press for them, but Marvel has somebody go on press, and all that means is you go to the actual printer and they run you off the press sheets. But printers don't just run off single sheets one at a time. Even with a signature that opens up at, 4 pages, 2 in the front and 2 in the back, they actually print them on massive, massive sheets that get kind of like all folded up and cut. And that's how you wind up with signatures. And when you go on a press check and you go on press, they bring you the uncut sheets off of the printer. And it not only is this whole sheet of things, but it also has like the color registration, so you can match the colors to the colors you expect. And somebody good on a press check will have their printout, like their physical comped copy of the book, and they will go page by page and not like read every word, but kind of just spot check enough things on every page that you know that it's coming out right. Now, when you're doing a big book like this, it's hard to know what it'll look like assembled because you're just getting these press sheets. So ultimately what the printer will do is they will make a comp copy with press sheets that's like an assembled version of the book. Now, I've never worked on something that's been 1,000 pages. I've worked on things that have been like 50 pages, 100 pages. And so they come, and because they're like kind of glued together, it's this like giant Frankenstein book. And I've sat and read, and you just check all the pages are in the right orientation, in the right spot, with the right page number. And that's how you do a press check. And it was actually one of my big jobs back when I worked in the print industry for a healthcare company. And so I've been on dozens and dozens and dozens of press checks. And but the point of that story is that the press check can't fix problems with an individual book. They can't fix if it got glue on it. It can't fix if it got like an ink smear. It can't fix if the pages didn't get cut correctly, because that's all things that are just happening as the books are coming off. Now, there's probably somebody who works at the printing plant who's a QC person, quality control, who's like checking one out of every like 50 or 100 books or something, but they can't be there for every book. So I'm much less sensitive to somebody's complaints of like, oh, mine has a glue mark on it. Like, buck up, buddy. But that's because I worked in the print industry, and I know this stuff is sometimes just outside of anybody's control. I'm much more critical of a book that's like missing a page, has an error, has something flipped, because I'm like, somebody really failed there. That's not just machinery error, that's human error. So I actually have been saving this. I have this weird little packet. I know it's in it because I wrote it on the front, but I've been saving it for when I have a book that I have a little bit less to say about the contents, to open this as a special bonus. Actually, I didn't know everything that would be inside of it. So, this is called Image Comics: The Road to Independence. I'm obsessed with 90s Image. You've heard me talking about the Wildstorm stuff previously, and there was a great Wildstorm oral history book that was released that I kickstarted that I got just in time to bring with me, and it was probably the main thing I did reading on the plane. But this previously was the most definitive version of Wildstorm's history, and not just Wildstorm, but all of the Image imprints. And it's actually gotten really hard to track down. I mean, it was only like a $35 book, but it's just hard to find it now. And so in my resurgence of interest in Image in the past couple of years, and this is from 2007, I set an eBay alert, and it took me months and months and months for the alert to turn up this book. And, it's like a little bit more of a fluff piece. Like, it's pretty much just these very PR-y kind of interviews with all the founders, and then also some other significant contributors. So it's not like earth-shatteringly interesting, and it's such a weird format. Like, why? What book is this size? I don't know. But I'm happy to have it because I love the history of this period, and I think that this caught a lot of the folks at a point that they were willing to say some things that I think 10 years later they probably wouldn't say, as they all kind of become more entrenched in the industry. So that's a cool thing. And then this book, I sadly missed the chance to tell you about the second Kickstarter of this. This is called Heartbreak Quadrant. It's like this great square, not quite album-sized book. It has the most amazing art. I've reviewed this on my page. It's kind of like drawn ink sketches that are then colored sometimes with traditional colors, but sometimes he creates like a pattern that he's like graffitied on his own, and then he scans it in and uses that pattern as his coloring. It's all by a single author whose name is Barrett Stanley, and it's about these two women in space who kind of are like very Han and Chewie. They have their own ship, they're kind of doing their own thing, but one of them is a special kind of human who is somebody that has a bit of a price on her head in addition to being a bounty, not a bounty hunter, but like a bounty person on her own. And Barrett Stanley actually kicked off a second Kickstarter of this a few months ago, and he actually messaged me to see if I wanted to interview him or talk about it, and I was in the throes of doing Crushing Comics and like figuring out what the series was going to be, and I missed my chance. So I'm super bummed, but I did kickstart it, so I will definitely feature it heavily when it comes out. This is fantastic. You can get it digitally. I just love it. I loved it. It was amazing. It blew my mind. Great story, great characters, great like imaginative future tech that is dropped in little portions to kind of blow your mind a little bit, but also not be like an overwhelming universe where nothing makes sense and everything is just a reference. So huge fan of this comic book. And then the surprise in here is, I want to make sure you can read this. It says, Crisis Team, working title, written by Peter Marinari. Hey, that's me. Version 0.5. So this is the book that I wrote in National Novel Writing Month in 2010. It has my original outline in it, complete with, does it have any of my pencil notes? No. Oh, here's my original outline in pen. And then here's my original character sheet. So this is like my whole packet of how I originally put this book together. And it's so funny that I was just talking about press checks. I had no idea this was going to be in here. So after I wrote the whole thing in installments through National Novel Writing Month, I joined a writer's group with this fantastic author and editor, Eric Smith, who's been an amazing friend to me. And he kind of like pulled me into doing the group. He's like, you've got to come. And so I knew I was going to be editing it, but I was tired of just reading it on screen. So I printed out my own little comp copy of the book. Like I made it so that it would actually have signatures and it would show the pages in the order that they should be shown. And I actually kind of read through in the book and made my edits in the book of like things I knew had to change. I wasn't doing like line edits of like every single word that had to change, but like, oh, that paragraph doesn't work. Oh, we need to remember we forgot to have this guy do XYZ thing at this past point. And then I started going through it and making my own edits. So this is, and I wanted to just see what it looked like assembled. It's actually gotten much longer because as I was editing, I think each chapter got like 25% longer. So it's a much longer book now. But I mean, I cherish this. Who knows if I'm ever going to publish it. I published the first couple of chapters on Crushing Crisis as part of my content extravaganza in November of 2016. I've been thinking about maybe making a podcast because that's actually how I got to meet Eric Smith originally. He was doing a podcast of a book he had written called Textual Healing that I participated in recording, and ultimately I wrote a song that became part of the soundtrack for that book. So maybe this is something that'll turn up on my channel. It's superhero oriented. I wrote it the year that I first started my collection. I was immersed in all this superhero stuff. It's a concept that I had since I was in 8th grade. That was actually the origination of why I'm called Crisis on so many different places. And I finally said, like, let's sit down and write the whole book. So in a way, it kind of like connects to Wildstorm because Jim Lee and Brandon Choi talk about how they were kids together and they would imagine all of these awesome worlds that became Wildcats and Stormwatch. And for me, this was my awesome world that I had always imagined, and I decided to sit down and finally set it to paper. So I hope it's something that I've done. It's done. The book is done. I edited the whole thing. But I feel like there's more to the universe that I can do, and I don't want to just put out the book and like not be able to build on either side of it. I mean, I'm such a comics fan, right? I can't like just let it be a single thing. But I would love for it to be out there at some point. So hopefully something you'll have available to you to read at some point in the future. So here's the official shelving of The Hands of Shang-Chi, Master of Kung Fu, Volume 2, of Heartbreak Quadrant, Phase 1, and of Image Comics, The Road to Independence. Here is their ceremonial shelving. And I don't know, I guess I can ceremonially shelve my own book. That's pretty cool. Here's the ceremonial shelving of the working title, Crisis Team, the only copy that exists in hard copy of my version 0.5. I can't even make it fit on the shelf. There you go. Okay. Whew. Thank you so much for tuning in and joining me for that kind of fun surprise and all those personal stories. There are only 3 bundles of books left on the shelf. One of them is huge, so it might turn into multiple episodes, but we're in the final countdown here to complete the shelving of this comic collection that I love so much. So thank you so much for tuning in, whether this is your first episode or whether you've kept up with me this whole time. There's only a few more to go here at Crushing Comics.